Welcome, Burai Nation, to the next installment of my discussion videos involving Transformers and Power Rangers versus their Sentai counterparts. I am Darth Zimby. I am your host. I am your discussion master. I am the host, or I am the person making the video and uploading it to YouTube for everyone's enjoyment. The purpose of the videos is primarily just to discuss, the topic of the day. In this case, today, the topic of the day is Transformers G1. Hail the Decepticons. See, hail to the Decepticons. This week's discussion is going to focus primarily on the G1 Transformers series from the early to mid 1980s. And one of the first points I think that's salient for me to touch on with this is the fact that I do believe, if I'm right, Japan had been doing a variety of TV shows and animations that involved giant mechs, or mecha, as they're called in Japan. But these kind of things were not, they weren't a thing in America. America's cartoons of that era were things like the Jetsons, the Flintstones, the Flintstone Babies, or Flintstone Kids, whatever it was called, the Muppets, Muppet Babies, things of that nature. A lot of puppets, a lot of just fun characters, or really annoying characters, depending on what cartoon or show it was. But our animation only involved mecha stuff in a very few instances. One of the ones I can think of off the top of my head is a show called The Centurions. If you know it, fantastic. Sure, the writing and everything about the show was kind of corny, but look at the era it came out in and all the other factors involved with it. It was actually, for its era, it was a really, really good American cartoon. I thoroughly enjoyed it growing up. But it is one of the only examples of shows with mecha of any kind that were American in that particular period of America's history. Again, I'm referring to the early to mid 1980s, even to as far out as the late 1980s to early 1990s. America itself did not develop cartoons that involved mechs or mecha of any kind, really, very often during that period of animation history and TV show history in this country. Japan was the one doing it. And we did take a lot of shows from Japan that, to one degree or another, involved mechs. GoBots is a show that the real long time, having done their research, fans know, led directly to the creation of the Transformers G1, G2 cartoon. And it was a show of human-sized mecha walking around that could transform and had these big battles in the show. I've never actually watched it, not in its entirety. I've seen a couple of episodes here and there. It was okay. I can't say I was a huge fan. But it was there. It was definitely there. And it was the stepping stone for Transformers. But Transformers itself kicked off a phenomenon that has lasted for 40 years now, give or take a couple of years. It spawned multiple live action and animated films, multiple animated TV shows, both here and in Japan. It's one of the great wonders of American animation history. And when you're looking at American animation history, you cannot go, in terms of the TV shows, you cannot go past and look past Transformers and the impact it's had on animation in America. So, with that said, let's dive into G1. Okay, G1 is essentially seasons 1 and 2 of Transformers. Optimus Prime is the main good guy. Megatron's the main bad guy. Lots of lore is introduced. Lots of bots are introduced. You also have to remember, this is a period of time where, and I've discussed this before in another video, Hasbro, who was in control of a lot of toy production lines and was behind a lot of TV series and cartoons in America at the time, primarily cartoons, because they used those to push toy products. This was a period of time where I felt that their decision making in terms of toy production and making money off of that versus making money off their cartoon lines, they made some really piss poor decisions. And the reason I say that is this is a period of time where Hasbro was known, and they have admitted this time after time, Hasbro was known to not really care much about the cartoons they used to push the toy lines. They wanted to make money just off the toys. That was it. That was their primary moneymaker. So they would use the TV cartoons that they were making, G.I. Joe, He-Man and She-Ra, Transformers, cartoons of that nature. They would use these to push toys that they had in production. These characters would make, a lot of the time, maybe one or two appearances in the cartoons, and that was just to get the characters exposure for the toys, and that was it. So you would have in Transformers, you had a core group for both the Autobots and the Decepticons, and then later on, kind of sort of the Junkions and the Quintessons and the Sharkticons. And these were characters that you saw all the time. Optimus Prime, Hot Rod, Megatron, Starscream, Soundwave, Shockwave, Hound, RC. There's a good list, but it's a lot shorter than the list of actual characters that became toys that were developed specifically for each individual series that Hasbro was behind. So that, in my opinion, I feel really caused a lot of the problems in quality and lore and animation screw-ups that you would see in a lot of these Hasbro-backed shows. And one of the worst examples, and I hate to say this because I absolutely do love the original Transformers. I really, really do. I grew up on the show. As a child, I watched new episodes every week. I would watch older episodes during the week after school. So I love the show, but man, it had, I think, the worst history of just major problems all over the place in animation history and in Hasbro's history. So we're going to kind of delve into some of that. Season 1 was approximately, I believe, 13 episodes. Let me bring up a list here. Transformers G1 episode. Episode list. All right, so the first thing that gets brought up after a search is the Transformers Wiki, which is a little bit unusual. But it works. Okay, so officially, Season 1 of Transformers G1 had 16 episodes, ending with the episode called Heavy Metal War, which is one of the first episodes where a lot of errors occurred. Where a lot of the main errors started to occur, or occurred in blatant full frequency throughout the entirety of the episode, and we'll get to that in a moment. So let's discuss this. Honestly, there's not a lot of episodes in this season that I personally watch on a regular basis. Having seen every episode of the original Transformers series a multitude of times, there's a lot of episodes I skip. It's not necessarily because I hate the episodes or I dislike the episodes. It's just because I find the storylines to be lacking. I find them to be not very exciting. And you also have to remember, I'm also looking at this now. I'm 41 years old. I'm looking at this from an adult's perspective. I've learned a lot. I've lived a lot. So I'm looking at this, and I'm trying to be impartial. And with that, having said that, most of these episodes just don't recommend themselves to me to watch time after time after time after time. Now, watching every now and again, just going full season to full season to full season to full season, sure. It's a nostalgia thing. And it's a callback to childhood, certainly. I do that sometimes. So if you feel like binge watching, certainly do it. But if you're looking for the most exciting episodes of the series, maybe not. It's up to each person's personal choices. It's a perspective thing, a point of view thing. Two of the episodes, or three of the episodes that really call out to me in this series, in this season, were SOS Dinobots, where the Dinobots, if I remember correctly, that is where they were initially introduced. It's a creation of the first three of the Dinobots. Grimlock, Sludge, and Slag, if my memory serves me correctly. Basically, the synopsis of the episode is the Autobots find this cave that they open up in the volcano where their ship crashed, where the Ark crashed, and it's now their base. And they're apparently fascinated by the dinosaur fossils that are discovered in this cave. So Spike decides to go, well, I'm going to go teach you about dinosaurs. So he does. He takes a bunch of Autobots to a museum. One thing leads to another, blah, blah, blah. Eventually they create 3 Dinobots. Grimlock, Slag, and Sludge. The Apatosaurus, or as the dinosaur was called at the time before its name changed, Brontosaurus, Triceratops, and Grimlock the Tyrannosaurus. The only one without a name that starts with S, which I find really odd. One thing leads to another. Eventually, the Dinobots are called to rescue the Autobots. This is after they were shut down and buried after their initial test by Wheeljack, because he was very true to what a dinosaur was, in the sense that he made them, compared to every other Transformer, pretty stupid. This is the reason that you are given as an insinuation to why a lot of them talk in the slow, kind of backwards way that they do. They more or less, they end up redeeming themselves by the end of that episode, and they're kind of sort of made official members of the team. But they're not really made official members of the team until the episode titled War of the Dinobots. So let me correct myself. I forgot this was one of the season 1 episodes. War of the Dinobots is one of my 2 absolute favorite episodes of this season, alongside SOS Dinobots. This is where Swoop and God, I can never remember his name off the top of my head. Wheeljack creates he creates Swoop, and he creates the other one, the Stegosaurus, Snarl, Swoop and Snarl. That's it. That's the two, the Pteranodon or Pterodactyl. I believe he's actually Pteranodon, if my memory serves, and the Stegosaurus Dinobot. One of the main reasons they're created is because Megatron has sweet talked Sludge, Slag, and Grimlock into betraying the Autobots. And those three end up capturing Optimus and several other Autobots, blah, blah, blah. One thing turns into another. The two new Dinobots, Swoop and Snarl, fight Slag, Sludge, and Grimlock, as well as Megatron, Starscream, and several other Decepticons. Again, one thing leads to another. The 5 Dinobots unite as a team, help save the Autobots, and now they're pretty much official members of the Autobot squad. Later on in season 2, you'll see some other stuff involving that, with a set of episodes called Dinobot Islands Part 1 and 2. Two of my absolute favorite episodes of all time in this particular iteration of a Transformers cartoon. Absolutely love those episodes. So much fun. And War of the Dinobots, SOS Dinobots, were really fun too. Now, the one episode of this season that I can say I hate with a passion, because I hate this group of this subgroup of Decepticons, is Rise of the Insecticons. Oh, I hate that episode. Can't stand the Insecticons in this series. I think they were just stupid. Again, this is one of those decisions on the part of Hasbro that I think really hurt Hasbro instead of helping them. Hasbro was pushing, like I said, they were pushing new bots constantly. Always introducing new toy bots and trying to use those toys as characters in the Transformers cartoon. 3 of them were the Insecticons. Now, as a concept, I actually love the Insecticons. I think they are a great concept. And in later video games and Japanese and American Transformer shows, they were actually used very well. And I like them in those shows. But here, they were just horrible. They were stupid. They were way too power hungry, way too ambitious. They were only pseudo affiliated with the Insecticons, the Decepticons themselves. They only make a few appearances here and there, and they always end up being way more trouble than they're worth. Like, they never helped even themselves, really. They always hurt everything and everybody, including themselves. They were just horrible characters in this cartoon show. That's how I see them. I absolutely hate them in G1, G2 cartoon. They were freaking worthless in my eyes. But again, that's a personal opinion on my part. I don't ask you to agree with me. If you like them, tell me why in the comments on this video. Please tell me why. I would love to hear why you enjoy the Insecticons. That being said, another reason I don't like this particular episode is I didn't like the storyline. I felt it was too separate from the overall arc that I felt they were trying to go for at this point with Transformers. It was basically, I would call it what's referred to in anime as a filler episode. where it's a standalone story. It doesn't have to be good. A lot of time filler episodes aren't really great, especially when compared to the rest of the anime or the cartoon that they're in. And I felt it took away from the show rather as a whole, rather than actually benefited the show as a whole. So that said, now we're going to move on to an episode that initially I was very hyped for, that I enjoyed quite a bit until later on into season 2. And that's the final episode of season 1 called Heavy Metal War, where the first combiner in the show is introduced. That being the Constructicons who form Devastator, who, while immensely powerful, is dumber than a brick. Really, he is. He's not considered to be all that intelligent, especially by the standards of Transformers. Matter of fact, in G1, he's often played off as being the only combiner where the intelligence of the individual components that create him, in this case the 6 Constructicons, don't actually merge properly to form the mind of the combiner mode itself. And one of the ways this is actually portrayed is the fact that Bone Crusher, who's either the left or the right arm component of Devastator, is so often referred to and made fun of for being the lowest man on the combiner totem pole for Devastator. He's the one component that Devastator apparently can absolutely do without on any occasion. And it doesn't matter if he gets damaged quite a bit before the Constructicons combine into their combiner mode, Devastator. They don't need him, essentially. That's how it's played. There's so many books and so much lore that says this out there. It's ridiculous. And it's a very fatal flaw in the lore of combiners in G1. And it's a flaw that you notice is not played out when any other combiner in the series is introduced. And there's so many others. Although I should make this note here and now that while Devastator is called the first combiner to be introduced in the series, he is not the first combiner introduced in the series. That particular honor goes to Reflector. He's technically the first combiner in the series. And the reason this is because he's 3 individual robots that transform and combine to form a little camera. Polaroid camera. Because, at that time in American history, Polaroids were the big way to take pictures in America. Polaroid cameras. Click, picture comes out, you shake it till it's cleared up, and hey, you have a brand new picture that you can put in an album or whatever you're going to do with it. Technically, Reflector is the first combiner introduced in the series. He just never really plays a big part in any episode except for one, and that's an episode where the Decepticons infiltrate this research lab where one of the human allies of the Autobots, Chip, who the wheelchair-bound character, and the incredibly intelligent human character in the series for the Autobot side, he's helping some researchers develop some tech and whatnot that involves Autobots. And Megatron uses Reflector to help gather information for a raid on this facility, this research facility, which they later raid, and then the Autobots have to come in and do their thing, and blah, 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 blah. Now, getting back to Heavy Metal War, one of the reasons I say that this episode is no longer my favorite is the lore that is given in the episode for the introduction of the Constructicons themselves. Megatron, on at least one or two occasions, I know one occasion for sure, I believe there were at least two occasions, specifically states in the episode that he built the Constructicons on Earth. Keep that in mind as I continue to discuss the Constructicons, because it makes a massive difference. It plays a massive role here. Basically, what ends up happening is Megatron has the Constructicons construct a machine, and then each Decepticon contributes a chip with their individual special power. They put it in the machine, while Megatron's standing in this energy cocoon, essentially, and he gets access to the powers and abilities, the special powers and abilities of every one of his Decepticon warriors. He then goes out and he challenges Optimus Prime to a fight. And the condition of it is, if he wins, the Autobots are permanently exiled from Earth, and they can't return, and Megatron gets Earth and all its resources. If the Autobots win, the same goes for Megatron and the Decepticons. They're permanently exiled. Now, this is supposed to be done by ancient Cybertronian law, which means he is only allowed to use his own powers and abilities. So by using the effects of this machine to use the powers and abilities of all his Decepticons, he's technically violating Cybertronian law. This is also the other reason he needed the Constructicons. Part of his plan is that while he's fighting Optimus in the arena, per Cybertronian law, he's going to have the Constructicons infiltrate the Ark and destroy Teletran 1, as it's the only thing on the planet that could detect his deception and inform Optimus and the Autobots. This is also where the Dinobots make their next huge appearance. They're guarding the base, essentially, while all the other Autobots are at the fight. The Constructicons tunnel in from below, infiltrate the base. That activates the base's alarm systems, and a huge fight ensues between the Constructicons, all 6 of them, and their combined form, Devastator, which is the first time you see Devastator is in this fight, versus the 5 practically unbeatable Dinobots. I love the Dinobots. I freaking love them. They are one of the only sets of Autobots I just love with a passion, and I can never see a fault in them, even though I know they have them. Like, the Dinobots are my boys. And I've always had a love of dinosaurs. That's certainly a contributing factor. But, like, I adore the Dinobots. I had several of the Transformer toys. The original Transformer toys as a child, and I used to play with them all the time. Will always be some of the favorite toys I've ever had. Push comes to shove. Megatron beats Optimus. Optimus thinks it's a fair fight, so they take him back to base. They're getting ready to leave after repairing Optimus. Teletran 1 informs them of the deception on Megatron's part, and via plot armor, the Autobots beat the Decepticons again. I can't say often enough how much I hate plot armor wins in cartoon shows, or any show. Because honestly, this is a fight that, when it was occurring, really should have gone to the Decepticons. I mean, they have Devastator. At that point, no combiners have been introduced for the Autobot side. So they have Reflector, they have Devastator, and they have the flight advantage, because that had been taken away after More Than Meets the Eye, Episode 3, which was the 3rd episode of the 1st season. Only a few Autobots had the ability to fly or glide in any capacity without outside assistance. So They really, in pretty much any fight that's Autobots versus Decepticons, really the Decepticons have an almost overwhelming advantage in that they can fly. Their mobility is so much greater. They have so much more space to work with in a fight. But they always lose because of plot armor and plot device. It's really sad and pathetic. But moving on. Now we're going to season 2. In my opinion, one of the worst episodes of season 2 is the first episode called Autobot Spike. Basically, a fight occurs between the good and the bad guys. Spike gets hurt, and while his body is being repaired, Wheeljack and Ratchet use a machine to transfer Spike's mind into a cobbled together from spare, busted up pieces Autobot body. And it very nearly drives Spike nuts for the time that he's in the body. Matter of fact, at one point, Megatron actually comes into the picture and convinces Spike to join the Decepticons, which he does. And then he betrays the Decepticons to rejoin the Autobots. It's just, I hated the episode. I thought the plot was far-fetched. I thought how it played out was really stupid. Just a really bad episode, in my opinion. Especially to start the second season. Now, approximately mid-season, we have absolutely one of my favorite all-time sets of episodes. And by episode 13 of season 2, we have the Decepticons making a comeback in the series in an episode entitled The Insecticon Syndrome, which is just basically, in most respects, a replay of their first episode in season 1. So not much to talk about. Episodes 14 and 15 are the two I was telling you about that I love so much that involve the Dinobots again, where they're the storyline, essentially. The story is some weird, never really explained how it occurs island is discovered that has dinosaurs. Still, basically, it's an island in the middle of one of Earth's bodies of water, one of Earth's seas. The Autobots discover it, and it's an island that is basically taken directly from the era of dinosaurs and transported into the 20th century. We don't know how it happened. Like, there is no explanation given for this in the episode, and I've never seen or heard of any explanation for how this occurs. But it is overflowing with resources that could be turned into Energon for either the Autobots or Decepticons. The Decepticons discover the island shortly after the Autobots basically transport the Dinobots there to go train and master their powers and abilities. They start stealing the energy resources and turning it into an Energon, which somehow ends up opening a bunch of time portals to various points in Earth's past. And we see Mongolian warriors, we see Vikings, we see cavemen with woolly mammoths coming through these portals. We see freaking pirates from the Age of Pirates. I mean, it's insane. We see Old West gunfighters in the episodes. It's truly an insane set of episodes, but it's so much fun. My only complaint about it is that the time travel stuff and how that island is there to begin with is never explained in anything I've seen or heard. Never. Not once. There's not an explanation I've seen. If you can find one, I would love it if you shared it with me in the comments. Please do. I would love it because this baffles me to no end, and it bothers me that there's no explanation I've ever been able to find. But it's a great set of episodes where, once again, the Dinobots get to really show off exactly how powerful they are and why they are the only team, sub-team, in the Autobot ranks that has ever been able to truly go toe-to-toe with the Constructicons as Devastator. Now, any of the Autobots can beat any of the Constructicons in a straight up fight, but when they combine into their combiner mode, Devastator, he's virtually an unstoppable engine of destruction until the Dinobots get their claws and teeth into him. And they wreck the guy, like every time, for some reason. They shouldn't be able to. If you actually compare stats, there's no way this should actually logically occur. But they do. Plot armor. It is what it is. But a really great series of episodes. 2 episodes, part 1, part 2, Dinobot Island. I freaking love these episodes. Then you get another series of episodes that are hit and miss. I mean, not episodes I would necessarily say watch every time you watch G1. But if you're binge watching, certainly watch them all. Even the ones that I say are horrible, in my opinion. Watch them all because you're binge watching. That's what you do. And some of you may enjoy some of these other episodes more than I do. So if you do, let me know and tell me why. I would love to hear that. I really would. But as much as I love Desertion of the Dinobots episodes 1 and 2 and Dinobot Island 1 and 2, the episodes in Season 2 that are my absolute favorite are, first off, we're going to start with The Secret of Omega Supreme. That is, where was it? Episode 30 of Season 2. While this episode still remains an absolute favorite episode of mine, it also brings into being probably the biggest lore screw-up in the history of the G1, G2 Transformers cartoon. Now, remember, I told you that Megatron specifically states at least once in Heavy Metal, the final episode of Season 1, that he constructed the Constructicons on Earth. Here's why I said to keep that in mind. In The Secret of Omega Supreme, we learn about Omega Supreme's past. He was the guardian robot of a city on Cybertron called Crystal City, back before this war that's occurring during the course of the cartoon that had been going on for millions of years prior to the start of the cartoon. Okay? Apparently, the Constructicons were good guys at one point and helped build many, many cities on Cybertron, including Crystal City. And when a city needed repair, they were the go-to guys. If it needed a repair, you called the Constructicons. Sure, okay. But this conflicts with the lore set forth in Heavy Metal War. In that, now we're finding out that allegedly the Constructicons have been alive for millions, perhaps billions of years. They were involved in the construction of some of the greatest cities on the planet of the Cybertron before war broke out between the Decepticons and the Autobots, Optimus versus Megatron, essentially. And they were also apparently the best friends of Omega Supreme. We also find out in this episode that Megatron's primary way of, allegedly, of recruiting Decepticons to his cause was he had built this machine that apparently had the ability to overwrite the core personality programming of any Transformer it touched and turn them evil and put them under his direct control. And this is what happened with the Constructicons. Then later on, it's also said that Megatron, once he got his hands on the Constructicon using this machine to turn them evil, he then took them to a lab and experimented on them and created Devastator that way. Massive conflict of lore. Now, later, Hasbro and the people behind the G1 Transformers cartoon basically state that the lore set forth in Heavy Metal War was not correct, that was a mistake. And that the lore set forth in The Secret of Omega Supreme is a true lore behind the creation of the Constructicons and Devastator. But that took them a long time to clarify. So there was, I think, a gap of 5 or 10 years after the end of this cartoon where we didn't know as fans what the hell was going on with that. It was a huge conflict. But despite that conflict in lore, this is still a great episode. It's so much fun. And you get to really get to know Omega Supreme. He becomes far less of a standoffish bot in the series. He becomes way more likable. And I love that. That's absolutely my favorite part of this episode. It's why this episode still remains a favorite to this day with me. Later on, we get the episodes The Key to Vector Sigma Part 1 and Part 2. Now, by this point, we had a subgroup introduced for the Autobots that is a combiner group, but we didn't know they were a combiner group because the combiner they make, Defensor, which is the combination of the 5 Protectobots, the combiner form isn't shown in the one episode that the combiners were really in at that point, which was the Insecticon episode in this season. And then you really don't ever see them again except one other time, and that's the tail end of season 1. Or, no, it's during season 3 is the last time you really see the Protectobots. One of the reasons I love The Key to Vector Sigma 1 and 2 is because it introduces you to some very important lore for Transformers. Specifically, it kind of introduces you to how the first Transformers were made and the sentient computer that made them, Vector Sigma, who becomes a factor in multiple episodes later on down the road. And Alpha Trion, who had been introduced in several previous episodes, they actually had in the season an episode shortly before The Key to Vector Sigma Part 1 and 2. They had an episode that was all about Alpha Trion. Essentially, one of the female Autobots, one of a team of like 5 of them that was left on Cybertron that never came to Earth. And this is like the only time you really see any of them except for RC. Elita 1, who is essentially the girlfriend of Optimus Prime, she uses this special power of hers and nearly dies. So a bunch of the Autobots have to go to Cybertron to rescue Elita 1, who has been rescued by Optimus Prime, who has to take her to Alpha Trion to fix her. And we find out that the main reason this occurs is because Optimus Prime and Elita 1 had been together for like millennia by this point, more or less. They've been a couple more or less for millennia. Dating back to Optimus's days as the bot known as Orion Pax. He was basically a warehouse worker, him, Elita 1, and her previous form, I can't remember the name, and her name at that time. I'm not even sure they mention it. And another guy. And Megatron attacks this warehouse. Orion Pax and Elita 1 get hurt. And Alpha Trion, who I believe was Prime at the time, although they never really say that either way, they sort of give some small hints that insinuate it, but it's nothing that's concrete enough to go on with. I'm guessing, making an educated guess, that he was the Prime at the time. He takes Orion Pax and his girlfriend back to his private facility, and he rebuilds them into Elita 1 and Optimus Prime. And then, as we all know, later on, Optimus is granted the Matrix of Leadership, which marks him as the Prime for the Autobots. And that was round about the start of the war between the Autobots and the Decepticons, which we also later come to find out is just another in a long series of wars that have occurred between the two factions at one point or another in the history of Cybertron and the Cybertronians. Kind of a key point here. But basically, the deal is that in these episodes is that Megatron's pissed because he has no road control on his team. So he decides to create a team of Decepticons who can try to take control of the roads from the Autobots. Thus comes into being the Stunticons. Now, when they're built, they have no personalities, which is really weird because when the Autobots built the Dinobots on Earth, they had personalities when they were activated. But for some reason, and this is another lore conflict, and this one I don't think was ever really resolved. For some reason, when Megatron constructs the Stunticons on Earth, they say that the only way to grant a Transformer a personality is to take them to Cybertron, take them to Vector Sigma, activate Vector Sigma, and have Vector Sigma give them personalities. Hence the lore conflict, because Stunticons have to be taken to Cybertron and Vector Sigma to get personalities. Whereas the Dinobots are built on Earth, just like the Stunticons were. But they didn't need Vector Sigma to get personalities, apparently. I don't know why that is. But whatever, it is what it is, I guess. This ends up leading Optimus Prime to follow Megatron to try to stop him. Push comes to shove. Megatron ends up gaining control of these Guardian bots that are about the size of a normal Transformer. And mind you, these aren't the Guardian robots of the same class and league as Omega Supreme. Okay, that's a whole different Guardian bot. These are just basically mass-produced physical defenders for Cybertron. And they're not intelligent. They're not intelligent. They're not sentient. They have to be controlled by something or somebody on Cybertron in order to function. Otherwise, they just kind of go bleh, and they don't do anything. So, I mean, that's a big difference. Megatron steals the key to Vector Sigma from Alpha Trion after him and several Decepticons, including his Stunticons, attack him in his private hidden lab, which I don't know how the hell they find. But apparently they do. Also note, Vector Sigma's been hiding on Cybertron, kind of fighting against Shockwave and his forces this entire time. And somehow Shockwave had control of these little Guardian robots, these mass-produced Guardian bots, as well, without using the key to Vector Sigma. I'm not entirely sure how the hell that works, because the episode specifically states that if you hold the key, you hold control over these bots. So it's really weird, and it's kind of another major lore conflict, but it is what it is. Turns out, these bots initially beat Trion, Prime, and his forces. They retreat to this hangar where these decommissioned shuttle ships are, and they end up transforming them into the Aerial Bot team. And I love the Aerial Bots. I think it's a great thing. It finally gave the Autobots some real air power outside of Jetfire, who had been introduced way into Season 1, you know? And we see him every so often in Season 1 and Season 2 after his initial introduction. So, now you have two sets of teams created, one on Cybertron, one on Earth. Earth equals the Stunticons, Cybertron equals the Aerial Bots. And neither team has personalities yet. They both have to get it from Vector Sigma. Again, going back to that lore conflict where the Dinobots are built on Earth and have personalities as soon as they're activated. Still don't get it. Whatever. Push comes to shove. Alpha Trion ends up sacrificing himself to activate Vector Sigma because they don't have another key. And he says the only reason this is able to happen, and this is one of the major reasons I suspect he was a Prime at one point. As a matter of fact, I suspect he was Prime when he built Orion Pax into Optimus Prime and recreated Orion Pax's girlfriend as Elita 1. He says that only a Transformer who is a first, and this is his words, I'm quoting this particular line pretty much word for word, only a first generation product of Vector Sigma has the ability to interface directly with Vector Sigma itself, thus activating Vector Sigma. Kind of an odd loophole to needing a key to activate it, and apparently doing this basically permanently reactivates Vector Sigma. Really weird, never explained. Big plot hole, all things considered. Point is, Stunticons get their personalities, Aerobots get their personalities towards the end of Key to Vector Sigma Part 2. We find out that the Stunticons form Menasor, the third known combiner for the Decepticons, the first known combiner for the Autobots. So we have the Aerobots form Superion, Stunticons make Menasor. So at this point we know the Decepticons have Menasor, they have Devastator and Reflector for combiner teams. The Autobots, the only combiner team we officially know for sure, is the Aerobots who form Superion. And then later in Season 2, matter of fact, towards the end of Season 2 is one of my final sets of episodes. And while it's not a Part 1, Part 2 set, the episodes directly tie one to the other. And that is Starscream's Brigade and The Revenge of Bruticus. I love these episodes because we get yet another combiner introduced on the Decepticon team. Basically, Starscream travels to Cybertron, the prison on Cybertron that the Decepticons had created. Because remember, at this point in Transformers history, in the lore, the Decepticons control Cybertron. And they have a prison down there. And basically what they put in prison there is not the bots themselves, but their personalities. I guess it's their core programming chip or whatever you want to call it, that has like their personality, their soul, essentially. That's what gets in prison in these little like index file size boxes. Okay, he goes there, he grabs this set of very rebellious personality chips from Decepticon history that is known as the Combaticon team. During the course of the episode, you learn some history about the Combaticons. And this all started because Starscream tried to take over the Decepticons for like the umpteenth time. And it didn't work. He got banished to a remote island. He found some old World War II era vehicles, planes and tanks and stuff like that. So he wanted to create his own team to help him take over the Decepticons. So he goes to Cybertron through the space bridge, grabs the Combaticons' personalities, comes back to Earth, rebuilds the machines he found, the war machines that he found, and he inserts the Combaticon personalities into them, thus creating the Combaticon team. Now, what we later find out towards the end of the episode is that he also gave them the ability to combine into Bruticus, who may not have necessarily the firepower or necessarily may not be necessarily the smartest of the combiner teams ever created on either side. He's still incredibly powerful. And apparently his only true weakness ends up being these 3 holes that Starscream installed on the back of Bruticus, that if you shoot those holes in succession, it shuts him down. Really weird weakness to put in. I mean, I don't fault Starscream for putting in a fail-safe contingency. Certainly, I don't fault him for that. That's actually intelligent, super intelligent. It's just a really weird contingency plan, in my opinion. But it is what it is. He ends up failing, ultimately. And him and the Combaticons get banished to a asteroid in space. Find out in Revenge of Bruticus, the follow-up episode, that the Combaticons are steering the asteroid to Cybertron because the new plan is take over Cybertron. Then they'd have a major bargaining chip with Megatron, could get whatever they wanted. So Starscream gets bored, which leads to him getting pissed. He comes back to Earth, blah, 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 blah. This is the episode where you find out about the weird contingency plan to shut down Bruticus. Because now in the episode, Megatron and his forces have to combine with Prime and his forces to stop Bruticus. Because he officially takes over Cybertron for a short time, which means he gains control of the security forces on Cybertron. End of the episode, Megatron agrees under pressure from Prime to destroy Bruticus. But what he actually does is he uses this machine to insinuate that he does so, but he doesn't actually do it. He ends up having Starscream reprogram the Combaticons and Bruticus to obey him, and only Megatron, and he takes Starscream back into the fold. That is essentially the end of Season 2. There's a couple more episodes after that. Episodes I'm not really impressed with. Then you have the break between Season 1 and Season 2, which is covered by the movie in 1986, Transformers the film, where a bunch of bots die, a bunch of new bots get introduced. It's the start of G2 in this iteration of Transformers the cartoon. Again, I don't watch much of this season on a regular basis unless I binge watch the entire show, start to finish. Five Faces of Darkness are pretty decent episodes in the season, and that's the 5-parter that opens the season. Killing Jar is okay. Starscream's Ghost is a favorite of mine. You got to remember at this point, Starscream's physical body is destroyed, but we learn in this episode that Starscream's spark is indestructible. It's immortal, literally. It can never die. He takes over, he's working for Unicron in the episode. He takes over a bunch of different bots and uses them to gather parts that he's supposed to use to kind of help rebuild Unicron. Trypticon's eyes and a bunch of other shit. In the end, he regains a physical body. That's pretty much the reason the episode exists, is to basically give Starscream a physical body again. Also in this episode, and a later episode deals with this, he takes over a triple changer on the Decepticon side called Octane. This leads to Octane being banished from the Decepticons' forces and hunted. So for a long time, he has no place to go until later on in the season, he turns to the Autobots for protection. And a bunch of stuff happens. It was kind of stupid. I really didn't like it. But I did like that, you have this episode where this incident occurs and leads to these specific consequences for Octane. And then that later on ends up tying directly into yet another episode later on in the season, where it's all about the Octane trying to deal with those consequences. So that's cool. I like that this is really the first time that they really did something like this in such a serious fashion in this show. So yeah, Ghost in the Machine, one of my favorite episodes. Carnage in C Minor is one of my favorite episodes, but I hear a lot of fans don't like it. I thought it was a pretty good thing. Not many episodes after that I would really recommend. Now, here is a set of episodes where you actually see Defensor. The first sub-team that's a combiner team that's introduced for the Autobots, but you never see them combine. This space plague infects a bunch of bots. In the end, it ends up infecting Superion and almost every Decepticon and Autobot, and most humans on Earth get infected. And it basically makes them uncontrolled rage machines. I mean, even Rodimus Prime gets infected. Okay? So this is how powerful the plague is, because the Matrix cannot protect Rodimus from it. And this is how this is the set of episodes they use to bring back Prime officially, instead of just bringing him back here and there. The only other episode in this season I truly enjoyed is Grimlock's New Brain. And this is the episode where an accident ends up happening where Grimlock becomes more intelligent than any other being in the universe. And he ends up creating a sub-team that's a combiner team called the... their combiner mode is Computron. They're the Technobots is the team name. 5 of them. And the way to make Computron as a combiner as intelligent as he needs to be to function is Grimlock transfers his intelligence from himself to Computron, thus turning himself back into the original version of Grimlock, which is pretty stupid overall. And that kind of makes a difference, because in this episode you basically see every combiner team that's been introduced at that point, except for, I think, maybe Reflector, who had basically disappeared off the radar by about early to mid season 2. And we don't really know what the hell happened to Reflector. And this leads us into season 4. Season 4, I don't refer to season 4 as an actual season. It's only 3 episodes. And it introduces a new type of Transformer thing called Headmasters and Triggermasters, where basically a biological being becomes the head or the weapon of either an Autobot or a Decepticon. And this leads to the second ending of the Transformers War, and allegedly the start of a golden age on Cybertron. Remember, the first ending technically occurred at the end of the 1986 animated film Transformers the Movie. And the end of that lasted, I think, in terms of chronological time within the show itself, I think was like 10 or 20 years. I'm not entirely sure. But this is supposed to end the war overall. And it also kills the show. I don't know why. I don't know why Hasbro made this particular decision, because this was probably the best cartoon they had going. But this is a choice they came to. Japan actually did a follow-up, which lasted like 1 or 2 seasons, called Headmasters. So if you really want to learn what happened after the Rebirth Part 3, find a way to watch the Japanese Transformers G2 cartoon called Headmasters and watch it. It's super good. I mean, there's so many fun episodes. A lot happens. And because of the difference between what we do with shows and cartoons in America versus what Japan does, we actually get actual deaths and then rebuilds of some of the characters in the Headmaster cartoon by Japan, which is phenomenal because the show is very fun, but it's got a much darker tone than the G1, G2 cartoon here in America did. Because they never kill anybody except in the movie. And we're not even technically sure if any of the bots that died in the animated film actually died. They just disappear. That's all we know for sure. So there is that. So that's G1, G2 in a nutshell. Later on, my video in 2 weeks from today, I will discuss a little bit more in depth the G1 or the G2 Headmasters cartoon by Japan. If you want to get some recommendations on websites you can use to watch it, please ask me in the comments. I will be checking those periodically on my videos. If you enjoyed this discussion, please leave me a like. Subscribe to my channel. If you have comments or questions, please leave them on the video. I really hope you enjoyed this. Transformers and Power Rangers and Super Sentai are shows that are really, really close to my heart. 1 week from today, unless something happens to delay the upload of the episode, I will be uploading officially my next episode, which will be a discussion, and I'm going to try to cover Season 2 and Season 3 of Mighty Morphin Power Rangers and the Sentais associated with those seasons. So, thank you, Burai Nation, for watching my videos. I really hope you enjoyed them. Again, please leave me any comments or questions. I will work hard to try to respond to those as quickly as possible. Enjoy your evening, and I hope to hear from you again. Please like, please subscribe, and this is Darth Zimby saying good evening to the Burai Nation.